Good afternoon and welcome to the 20th episode of Ahargana. I am in Goa in the monsoon. I am south of South Goa, so there are no beaches here. South of South Goa, you really have the Western Ghats coming down to the ocean. And that's what you are seeing behind me. There's hardly any sandy beaches here. It's all the forest and the trees and the vegetation coming all the way down into the ocean. And I'm in a fort. It's called Fort Cabo de Rama. I'm not sure who built it, but obviously this was named by the Portuguese a long time back. It's a monsoon day, but it's not raining. It's bright and sunny, a little bit warm, but extremely breezy. So it's perfectly nice, feels very good to be here. As always, every episode of Ahargana, I try to be out in the nature where it feels good to be outside. This episode is no exception to that. But you know that we are not here to talk about nature, at least not about nature, not even on this scale. We are here to talk about nature on a much grander scale of the sun and the moon. We are still in Chandramana. We are coming to the close of Chandramana. We are talking about Ritu. And I once again almost did not make this episode. I thought I'll make this a tutorial, a short video, because I'm going to explore at what point in time the Chandramana definition of Ritu was conceptualized. And I thought that's a simple matter, so it doesn't need much explanation. But the more I explored it, the more I realized that it was not extremely, but it is somewhat complicated. And for the first time in Ahargana, I'm not going to rely on Surya Siddhanta or the works of Sri Balgangadhar Tilak, but this is a bit of a original analysis that I have done myself. But using all the techniques that I have presented so far in the series. So the idea is, in the last episode we saw that Chandramana definition of Ritu, which means Chaitra and Vaishaka begin vasanta Ritu and so on and so forth, is significantly problematic today because Chaitra and Vaishaka more realistically begin Grishma Ritu, summer. But I argue that that definition held good a very long time back. So the question is, when did it hold good? The analysis, as always, is to follow the precession of the equinox, because that is why that definition is no longer good today. But then you should ask me, how is it that something which is defined using the moon is affected by the precession of the equinox? The precession of the equinox is a solar phenomenon. Equinox is solar. It has no effect on the moon or on amavasya. So why am I connecting the two? What is the relationship? Amavasya has its own cadence. You know that Phalguna amavasya falls back, jumps forward, but even then it never comes back in the same place for 19 years. So that has a ayana, a dance of its own. That has nothing to do with precession of the equinox. Then why am I connecting the two? I am connecting the two because I realize that the moment we insert adhika masa, we are pegging Phalguna amavasya to Sauramana Yugadi. So Sauramana Yugadi is April 14th, Phalguna amavasya is the amavasya before April 14th. It falls back, we push it closer to April 14th, April 12th, April 8th, April 12th, as much as possible back to April 14th. And because we are pegging Phalguna amavasya to Sauramana Yugadi, in a sense, Chandravarsha has become Nirayana. In a sense, not exactly, but because of this pegging. So we can divert our attention from Phalguna amavasya to meshadi again. And today ayanamsha is 24 degrees. I am going to argue that the time when ayanamsha was minus 30 degrees, that is when the Chandramana definition of Ritu held good. Why minus 30? Because minus 30, put it positively, is plus 330. And if you go back to the sayana definition of Ritu, 330 is the beginning of vasanta. So in effect, we are going to look for a period when 330 degrees was meshadi. 330 modern degrees, Western degrees is meshadi, was meshadi rather. At that point in time, the Chandramana definition, Chaitra indeed began vasanta ritu and not Grishma ritu. So if you feel this is complex, it is slightly, but it is using all the principles we have discussed so far, and I am going to show it to you visually using Stellarium, and then you will understand it much better. So I am going to roll the animation now. Take a look. Okay, let's get started. In the last episode, we looked at the Chandramana definition of a Ritu, and we also saw that that definition does not correlate with ground realities today. In this episode, we will investigate if at some point in time in the very distant past, the Chandramana Ritu definition actually correlated with ground realities. So to do that, I am going to call upon a lot of things that we have already learned in the Ahargana series. So let's start with the sayana definition of Ritu. Here is the ecliptic, here is meshadi. And the Ritus are beginning from Dakshinayana point. Shishira begins here, Vasanta, Grishma, Varsha, Sharad, Hemanta. You are familiar with all this. Here are the two Vishwats and here are the two Ayanas. Now, on top of this, I am going to superimpose a Chandramana definition of Phalguna amavasya. Phalguna amavasya of 2021 happened on April 12th. Phalguna amavasya is the end of Phalguna masa, beginning of Chaitra masa. So, according to the Chandramana definition of Ritu, this would be the beginning of vasanta also. But we see here that the sun is actually very close to the beginning of Grishma Ritu. This close, and that is why this definition, this Chandramana definition, which says Vasanta Ritu is going to start now, does not correlate with ground realities, because in reality Grishma is going to start as soon as the sun comes here. It is already extremely hot in India. Now I am going to continue and show this to you. You have already seen this video before, this segment before, when I talked about adhika masa. So I am going to jump forward 1 year from this point and show you the next Phalguna amavasya happened on 1st April 2022. That is also pretty close to the beginning of Grishma. Not as close as in 2021, but it's still pretty close. I will jump 1 more year, and Phalguna amavasya has fallen behind this much. So it happened on 21st March 2023. Whereas Grishma begins here on 20th April 2021. Though 21st March 2023 is not very close, it's almost 1 month away from the beginning of Grishma, it is still not the beginning of Vasanta. I mean, it is 21st March. It's extremely hot in South India already. Because to really correlate with ground realities, these Phalguna amavasyas should be happening somewhere here. But instead of happening here, Phalguna amavasyas are taking place in this part of the ecliptic. Let's continue further 1 more year, and what happens? Phalguna amavasya jumps forward because an adhika masa was added. So instead of falling further behind, it leaped forward to 8th April 2024. You are familiar with this. A 13th month was added, and Phalguna amavasya was pushed forward closer to meshadi. Continuing forward again, next year it happened on 29th March 2025. Year after that, 19th March 2026, and after that leaped forward again to 7th April 2027. So the beginning of Chaitra masa keeps happening in this small segment of the ecliptic. I will go 19 years like this, and you can see it keeps leaping forward. 3rd April. Now it falls behind, leaps forward to 10th April. Now it falls behind, leaps forward to 8th April, then falls behind, leaps forward to 4th April. So it keeps happening in that segment. Now it's happened in 11th April. So Phalguna amavasya keeps happening in this segment, which means Chaitra masa is beginning when the sun and the moon are in this segment, which means soon Grishma Ritu is going to begin, whereas the Chandramana definition says Vasanta Ritu is going to begin. So what I am going to do now is investigate if ever in the distant past, instead of happening here, Phalguna amavasyas happened in this segment of the ecliptic, somewhere here. If Phalguna amavasyas happened here, then Chaitra masa began here, then indeed when the sun comes here, Vasanta begins. And it correlates with ground realities. Now you think about it, how can Phalguna amavasya ever happen here? Now, amavasyas happen here, I am not denying that, but any amavasya which happens here today would be called Pausha amavasya, and then Magha amavasya, and then Phalguna amavasya. Whereas I want Phalguna amavasya to be happening here, not Pausha amavasya. Now, the reasoning next step is, the whole idea of adhika masa is to tether Phalguna amavasya to meshadi. The idea of adhika masa is to push Phalguna amavasya close to meshadi. It falls behind, but then it gets pushed forward to meshadi. It's like a yo-yo. It falls this far behind, then it gets pulled back to meshadi. So meshadi is the anchor to which Phalguna amavasya is associated. So the amavasya just before meshadi is Phalguna amavasya. So imagine if meshadi was here at 3:30 degrees, then Phalguna amavasya will be here. And is it possible for meshadi to be here at 3:30 degrees? Most certainly, because you have understood the concept of ayanamsha. You know that meshadi doesn't move, it's rock solid, but these points move. These Vishwats, these ayanas, this entire ecliptic is gradually drifting. So this 3:30 degrees at some distant point in time would indeed have coincided with meshadi. So our next part of this episode is to investigate at what point in time in the past this 3:30 degrees coincided with meshadi. And once we do that, we have the answer to our question as to when in the distant past the Chandramana definition of Ritu correlated with ground realities. So we will now move forward into the second part of this animation to investigate the precession of the equinox and to find out when this 3:30 degrees coincided with meshadi. Once again, I am reusing an episode from the past. This is about ayanamsha and the precession of the equinox. So you have seen this episode also, but it will help you to refresh your memory to see it a second time. So here is meshadi, there are two Vishwats, two ayanas, and I am going to draw the nakshatra mandala, because in the distant past, we have reasons to believe that only the nakshatra mandala was used and not the Rashi mandala. There are references to the nakshatra mandala in our ancient Vedic texts, but not to the Rashis. I will now zoom in onto one portion of the ecliptic. This is where meshadi is. But Vasanta Vishwat is here, that is the 0 degree point, and the gap between them is ayanamsha, and that is 24.15 degrees. Now I am going to run the animation, and you will see that Vasanta Vishwat moves towards meshadi because I am going to run time backwards. So we will go into the past using the Stellarium as a time machine. And I will run this animation fairly fast. You have seen this in great detail in the past in an earlier episode. So now 0 degrees has coincided with meshadi. So vasanta vishwat and meshadi are one and the same. That means ayanamsha has become 0 degrees, and this happened in 285 AD. We have seen this in an earlier episode. But now in this episode, our interest is to go further back in time, because we want to see the beginning of vasanta, not vasanta vishwat. Vasanta vishwat is the middle of vasanta. We want to see when the beginning of vasanta, that is 330 degrees, coincides with meshadi. So now already ayanamsha is 0. Ayanamsha was 24, now it has become 0. Now I am going to proceed further back in time. So ayanamsha will effectively become negative. So let me run this animation now, and let us watch at what point in time this 330 degrees coincides with meshadi. So now we have gone into BC, 200 BC, 300 BC, 400 BC. Time is flying backwards, not forwards. And let's see how long it takes to get 330 degrees to meshadi. We are almost there. And now the beginning of vasanta has coincided with meshadi. 330 degrees and meshadi are one and the same. 330 sayana degrees and meshadi are one and the same. And this happened in 1890 BC. 1890 BC. Now, in earlier episodes, we have gone back in time to this level to refresh your memory. In one of the earlier episodes, I had pointed out, based on Sri Bal Gangadhar Tilak's research, that the Taittiriya Brahmana and the Taittiriya Samhita were written when the 0 degree point was near Kritika. It was actually here. Right now it stopped a little bit shorter. So at that time we went as far back as 2300 BC. Now we have stopped at 1890 BC. But you can see that essentially we are now in the Vedic period. We are getting into the period when the Taittiriya Brahmana, Taittiriya Samhita were about 500 years old. So that is the kind of time period we have gone into in the past. We have gone back into the Vedic period, and meshadi and vasanta vishwat, meshadi and the beginning of vasanta are coinciding now, 330 degrees and meshadi. And ayanamsha is effectively minus 30 degrees. What that means, the gap between vasanta vishwat and meshadi, you have to come in the reverse direction. Planets are all rotating in that direction, but we have to now come in the backward direction, 30 degrees, to come here. Good. So now we can get to the final part of our analysis. I'm going to zoom out so you can see the entire ecliptic once again, but this time you see that meshadi is coinciding with the beginning of vasanta, 330 degrees. Now, don't get confused. I don't want you to think that meshadi moved from up there to down here, because so far we have always had meshadi up there. Now it's down here. You just saw that meshadi really did not move. So what really happened was the orientation of this particular view, it should have been like this, with meshadi there. But if I do it the way Stellarium works, you find that Dakshinayana is no longer at the bottom. Uttarayana is no longer at the top, and I found that confusing. I wanted to keep Dakshinayana, Uttarayana right on the vertical, and hence I preferred that orientation, as a result of which you feel that meshadi has moved. No, meshadi has not moved. It is the 330 degrees which moved to meshadi. Now let me once again bring all our seasons back. So here is Shishira, Vasanta, Grishma, Varsha, Sharad, Hemanta. I'm not showing the dates this time because we have gone so far back in time that the Christian calendar behaves differently. January, February, March were different in those days. So it is sufficient for our purpose that Vasanta begins here, you know that. And now I will bring in Chandramana into the picture and Phalguna amavasya into the picture. So this is Phalguna amavasya because it's happening just before meshadi. And since meshadi, I have located it on beginning of Vasanta, now Chaitra masa also is very close to the beginning of Vasanta, according to the sayana definition. So now you find that the Chandramana definition is aligning with the sayana definition, and hence the ritus as per the Chandramana definition will align with ground realities. To understand that, as of now, it is the end of Phalguna Masa Krishna Paksha, so it is end of Shishira Ritu, and I roll the animation, Vasanta Ritu starts, but at the same time, sun has also come beyond this point, so it is Vasanta Ritu according to the sayana definition also. So let me continue. So now it is Vasanta Ritu according to both definitions. This is Vasanta according to the Chandramana definition, and the sun's position tells you this entire segment is Vasanta Ritu according to sayana definition. So we are still in Vasanta, both are in Vasanta. Vaishaka Shukla Paksha, Vaishaka Krishna Paksha, Chaitra and Vaishaka make up Vasanta Ritu. So now Vasanta is going to change into Grishma Ritu. There he goes, Grishma, and the sun is also approaching this point, so now the sayana definition also is Grishma. So both these definitions are now perfectly aligned. Not perfectly, or almost aligned. And that is what I was trying to determine, that in 1889, 1890, somewhere around that time period, that is when the Chandramana definition of Ritu and the Sayana definition of Ritu were aligned, and hence the Chandramana definition of Ritu and ground realities were also aligned at that time. So now Grishma Ritu is going to end, Varsha is going to begin according to the Chandramana definition, and there you go, Varsha begins, and there the sun is moving, and now the Varsha Ritu begins according to the sayana definition. So these two are very much aligned, and that's exactly what I wanted to show in this analysis, that in the distant past, during the Vedic period, the Chandramana definition of Ritu worked very well. And also that is why the Chandramana definition of Ritu is called the Vedic definition, because it is quite likely it was also defined around the similar time frame as Taittiriya Brahmana and Taittiriya Samhita. So that brings me to the end of this episode. As always, I appreciate your patience in staying with me through this episode. Thank you very much for watching. Welcome back. While you went as far back as 2000 BC, I just came down to the southern tip of South Goa. That's what you see in the center of the screen behind me. That's literally the southern tip of South Goa. From there, the beaches of South Goa go all the way north up to Double M Airport. You can't see those beaches, but you can see the southern tip and the sandy southern tip. Behind my head is the Arabian Sea, and on the other side is the Sal River, and what you see, the water body behind me, is really that estuary of the Sal River, and from there South Goa starts. Behind the camera, of course, Goa continues further south, but it's all the mountains, the Western Ghats coming down all the way into the Arabian Sea. But I'm not opening an episode this time, I am closing an episode, so I will not talk much about nature. So in this episode, we pretty much conclude the topic of Chandramana definition of Ritu. and at what point in time in the past, 2000 BC, when that definition was accurate. I'll make just one more episode on Ritu, where I will focus on the cold winter months, that means Shishira and Hemanta and Shishira, and I will argue in that next episode that these almost 1/3 of the year being cold does not make sense to somebody like me who lives in one of the 4 southern states. And I will argue that this definition, the Hindu calendar, must have been defined by somebody who lives north of the Vindhya mountains. But that's for the next episode. Thank you very much for watching this episode, for staying with me all this while. Thank you very much for staying with the Ahargana for more than a year. And once again, I request you to please forward the link of this channel to all your contacts and encourage them to watch these videos and learn the astronomy of the Hindu calendar. This topic should be known to all Hindus, and I want to from now onwards propagate this topic and propagate this channel. This knowledge should not be esoteric, it should be well known to everybody. So, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm going to close this episode here. Take care and bye-bye.